Has anyone not heard of Bitcoin? I do just want to, because it's okay if it's new to you, and if people are watching at home, do they need to know what Bitcoin is to understand any of this? Because it's possible people are watching and they don't know what Bitcoin is.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, Bitcoin is a new digital currency.
Cool.
Right. And it's not backed by any government. And it's just kind of like people are calling it the currency of the internet, and it's all digital. Like it doesn't exist in the physical world at all. Right, and it's been getting a lot of news coverage. Sometimes it's actually pretty bad.
Why is it bad?
Because like imagine like the early days of the internet, like the early 90s, and the first community that got attracted to the internet were like people who were trying to do like some shady things or some illegal things online. Bitcoin kind of like went through the same phase where initially, you know, a lot of the usage might not have been completely legal.
People were buying drugs.
Yeah, people were buying drugs, and like that, and that's also a very like clickbait story.
Yeah.
So it gets a lot of coverage, but like Bitcoin has been around for 7 years now. And
I didn't know that.
There has been a lot of like investments. More professional firms have stepped in. There are a lot of like very interesting use cases which are coming up, and this technology is growing. So imagine like if early 2010 was like 1992 for the internet. So we have grown over the last like 4 or 5 years, but we are still like pre-Netscape era. There's no like browser for this technology where you can like just go and use it. But let's come back to this question of like why would you have a new currency? Like what's wrong with the world right now? Like everyone is, you know, we have cash, we have bank accounts, we have credit cards, the world seems to work just fine. For that, I will like ask everyone to kind of like take, kind of like go to a higher level and try to imagine that maybe we are just used to the world being the way it is, and try to envision that, hey, things could actually be better, right? So the first thing is that currencies, so fiat is a currency that is like, you know, think of it as like a more traditional government-backed currency. They're actually not very stable. We don't feel that in the US, right? But if you look at the rest of the world, like, so I was born and raised in Pakistan, and people would not keep their savings in the local currency. They would actually either buy gold, or they would actually buy the British pound.
Because it's more stable.
Because it's more stable, right? So they don't want to just like have their savings in the local currency and then after 4 years see that it actually went down in value. So this is a chart of the Chinese currency versus the dollar. And there was a massive hit in around August of 2015 that not a lot of people actually noticed that this happened. But a lot more people noticed when Brexit happened. Right, and the British pound took like a massive, I think this was between 25 to 30% hit in value, because imagine that these currencies are tied to whatever the government is doing, right? And if your government is not very stable, like you live in, I don't know, somewhere in Africa, Argentina has had massive problems. So these currencies are actually not stable because they're tied to a particular government, right? So if we can design a currency that doesn't have that constraint, that'll be pretty cool. The next thing is that our currencies, to operate them, you depend on a lot of infrastructure. Like think of the banking infrastructure, right? But the banking infrastructure is not like the internet. It's not open. You can't just like innovate on top of it. It's actually closed source. Only banks can access it. And what ends up happening is that you get charged all these fees. Like why does it charge $40 to send a wire? It makes no sense. Right? Banks are able to extract that money because they have a monopoly. Right? If all of the banks are charging at least $40, that's the price you pay for sending a digital wire from one place to another. Right? And then there's all sorts of overhead. They're slow. They can like introduce new fees, and you can't really do anything about it because they control the infrastructure. It's closed source.
So you're saying like one of the problems with the fact that money is tied to countries is, and physical banks, is that because they have this monopoly, they can charge us whatever, and we don't have control of the money. They have control
So it's
of the
like
money.
different levels of control, right? Like the governments have control in a different way, and then these institutions, banks, which are like really private sector, but because there are so few of them, and they kind of the infrastructure is closed source. A good analogy is like the way I think about it is if you go back to the 90s again, it's kind of like the Linux versus Windows.
Oh yeah.
Because Windows was you had to pay a license. It was closed source. People can't just edit it, make any changes. And then Linux came along, and again, initially it was clunky, and only like these nerdy developers were working with it. But if you look at the market for data centers or servers, Linux is by far the winner. Right? It's the more stable operating system. Now it is. It's completely taken over.
But it was really radical to think that this free open source.
Unthinkable that this free open source thing that any developer can basically hack on would actually take over the product from the biggest company out there, Microsoft.
Awesome.
Right? But it happened because open sourcing things actually enables innovation. So the point here really is that right now, the rate of innovation in this industry is actually being slowed down because of closed source infrastructure that banks are sitting on. Right?
That's awesome.
And another interesting thing is the current payment methods are not very friendly towards your privacy. Like everyone has seen these online forms where you have to enter your credit card information, your name, where do you live, before you can actually make a payment. And there is no equivalent of cash online that I can just like give you like a $5 bill and without any information on like here's my number and here's my street address, and we can actually do something about this as well. So I think to summarize, basically our system right now is not very simple, and users don't have a lot of control. By that what I mean is that you can't really put a lot of cash under your bed. I mean, people do. They go and like some people go and buy gold or like fill up their mattresses, right? Because they don't trust the banks. Like, but that's not the norm, right? And because it's like physically hard to manage all of your cash, right? And then you have to put it in banks, but now you're really dependent on the services that the bank is providing. And it's not just the banks, it's also the payment processor. So if you look at PayPal, if you're a merchant and you use PayPal for accepting payments and PayPal shuts down your account, suddenly your business is in trouble, right? And it happens to a lot of people, especially outside of the US, where PayPal would suddenly just shut down your account and you're like, okay, what do I do now? My website is going down. I can't accept payments anymore, right? So, and the other layer of dependence is like eventually you're tied to countries and governments. And if, let's say, I was born and raised in Pakistan, if something bad is happening in the country or the government is not very stable and the value of my currency is going down, like I'm losing money and it's not my fault, right? Because the government is like did something wrong, it's not stable anymore. But so at a high level, we are dependent on all these large companies and governments, and maybe there's a better way, right? Like maybe we can actually design a global system for digital payments where we are not dependent on any of these parties. And that's where Bitcoin comes in.
Awesome.